enjoy the presentation, you guys. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thank you, Marielle. Thank you, Jeff. Good morning, everyone. Matt Kuisle here with Reserve Advisors to talk about the all-important subject of reserves and reserve studies today. I am a 25-year veteran of Reserve Advisors, been with the company for quite some time. We work nationwide. We have offices throughout the country working on community association reserve studies for the most part. It is my passion. It is something that I've been involved with since moving to Florida, more in depth for the last approximately 20 years here in the state of Florida. I've been working very closely with the Florida Legislative Alliance and Community Associations Institute, for those that don't know them. Wonderful organization, chapters throughout the U.S. and abroad that works a lot on education as well as governance and advocacy for community associations. So through them, they have a legislative alliance, which I'm a delegate to. So I've been working with some of the lawmakers on some of the new laws, as well as on the National Board of Trustees for CAI. I am a professional engineer, a reserve specialist, which is another CAI designation, a professional reserve analyst, and like many of you, condominium board member as well. So I'm a glutton for punishment, been on my condo board at a small condo where I live in Tampa for the last, I think 15 plus years now at this point on that board of directors. I keep trying to give the job away, but continue to fall into it. Thankfully, we're a healthy community with pretty harmonious neighbors. So I enjoy the role, and it gives me a good perspective. Today's course is implementing and utilizing your reserve study. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides here. I've got this course is somewhat general for reserve studies in general. So whether you're a condominium, an HOA, or a cooperative in the state of Florida, or abroad, anywhere, this course will apply to you. It is a 1-hour credit course for community association managers, also approved for CMCA credit. If you have those, you can let me know. Send me a note. I'm happy to get you credit for that as well. But anyone that's presented their CAM number as they registered here will get a credit for 1 hour for this as well. But it's good for boards too, and good for everyone. I want to just be clear and set the expectation here. The HB 913, which was signed by the governor last week and went into effect yesterday, is not the heavy topic of today's course. We certainly we have a lot of information. There's a lot in there and a lot to unpack. I've got a couple of webinars next week that I'll be doing on those. If you want to follow me on LinkedIn or send me a note, I'm happy to get you an invite to those. That'll dive a little bit deeper into the specifics for condominium associations, primarily the changes and of course the structural integrity reserve studies and the milestone inspections and all of that good stuff. We'll get into that a little bit here today, but it won't be a deep dive. And I know ACE by TSK is also going to be doing some updates, legal updates, as well as that course, and some of your attorneys will be doing updates as that new legislation is kind of unpacked. There's a lot there. It's a 191-page bill. So there's a lot of provisions there. I'll try to, like I said, the course material itself is not focused on that, but we'll hopefully be able to answer a number of those questions as we get towards the end of the presentation. We'll save some time there. Overall, reserves are a huge industry in a way. They're over $25 billion according to the Community Association Research Foundation, which is a foundation, a research arm of Community Associations Institute. Studied that a few years ago. The numbers probably increased dramatically over the last couple of years as well. That number's old, so it's a massive amount of money and a massive impact to community association living to really enhance, repair, replace the common property. There are a few different funding goals, and this is based off of a SNAP survey from several years ago for Community Associations Institute. But it gives me a chance to look at their data indicated that about 45% of the respondents in their survey were doing full funding of reserves. So I'll take this opportunity right now to describe full funding, because it's one of the most confusing topics, and in Florida especially, we have an additional layer of confusion in that we refer to our budgets as either fully funded or we're partially funded or waiving the reserve. The fully funding according to the reserve study industry, which is established by CAI and the national international now reserve study standards, says that the full funding reserve would be maintaining 100% of the fully funded balance of the reserves. It is the most conservative method of funding, but and kind of the highest cost to fund. Essentially, full funding in CAI's terms means we have 100% of the fully funded balance. The fully funded balance is essentially the amount set aside for the useful life that's used up on a component. So a real simple example, if we've got a roof that's 10, let's say it just has a 10-year life, just for simple math, and $100,000 cost, the fully funded balance in year one is $10,000, and year two is $20,000, and year seven the fully funded balance is 70,000. So depending on where that item is in its useful life, you've got a fully funded balance associated with the roof, a fully funded balance associated with your painting, your paving, etc., all the way down the list, and you've got this really big number that is typically the fully funded balance of the association. And essentially what it is if we set aside funds from day one of the association being in existence, the appropriate amount of funds based on the cost and useful life of each element in a component schedule, so broken up into each individual item, that's how much we would have. Now, most associations don't come anywhere near, in my experience, 100% of that fully funded balance. Now, and you don't need to come to that level. It's kind of an ideal number. Like I said, it's the most conservative method, but the Florida statutes allow us to also use baseline or threshold funding of the reserves. This simply means that we have enough reserves when the item needs to be replaced. So when we're talking about a fully funded budget, or maybe better word, fully funding our budget in the state of Florida, essentially what we're meaning is we're setting aside at a minimum the baseline amount of reserves to ensure that we have the funds available when the item needs to be replaced. Essentially, to conduct this type of a reserve analysis, we look at the cash flow of all the expenses and what is the minimum level of contributions to achieve a cash flow that never drops below zero. Threshold is kind of in between. It's a little more conservative than the baseline funding, less conservative than the full funding. It essentially says instead of targeting zero as the low point on our cash flow, we're going to target some threshold. We're going to target an amount above, whether that's a 20% funded or 50% funded or $50 or $5,000, anything above zero as the target on the threshold. And we'll look at some examples of that later on. Would be considered threshold funding. And that's honestly what most associations, what we're typically recommending, and what most boards that we talk to like to target is, not just zero, because we know unexpected things can happen. We want to build in a little bit of a factor of safety, but we can't, in most cases, get to a fully funded balance just because of the cost that would be needed. And when we see these cash flows where associations are targeting a fully funded balance, they generally have more cash on hand than they ever really need, which is kind of a risk in and of itself. So we like to use the term adequate funding of the reserves, which really is kind of a combination of having a healthy percent funded, but also a cash flow that ensures no special assessments would be needed. And a little over a quarter of the community surveyed in this survey said they have an inadequate funding of reserves. And I think that's very common throughout our state, where people have waived reserves year over year, and resulting in boards that just don't have the money to do projects that are absolutely necessary. I like to remind folks that the roof or the concrete or the paint doesn't care which one of these selections you've made as a board or as a community. They're going to wear out when they wear out, and then the board has the difficult decision of determining how we're going to take care of it, if we're going to take care of it. Hopefully the answer is yes, we're going to take care of the component, because that is our obligation. We have a fiduciary duty to do so as a board member. But if we don't have the reserve funds, boards are left with limited options. One being special assessments, the one being you could determine some financing, some loans are available. And then the other alternative that many boards fall into is they defer the project or do a Band-Aid or a minor repair on something that kind of throws good money after bad, as they say. So we're trying to get more communities. Now the new statute, HB 913, I know I'm not going to dive deep into it, but it does clarify that we have to at least have a baseline funding level of our structural integrity reserves, which again is kind of the minimum level. It's risky. There's no room for error there, but at least gets your reserves to a point of not falling short or not being inadequate when those key structural projects are needed. But these are applied whether you're talking about a structural integrity reserve study or a kind of a standard reserve study. The reserve study deliverables we're going to go through just high level. I want to talk about each report is going to be a little bit different. You're going to see some examples here today about what's in a reserve study. And the kind of the purpose of this course is to, like I said, introduce people to the idea of reserve studies and help them read them. We hear time and time again that the board didn't understand, or they got the reserve study, but they didn't use it. They didn't understand it, whatever it might be. They didn't fully implement the reserve study. So hence the utilizing and implementing title of this course is to help familiarize you as managers and board members to understand what's in the reserve study, what to look for, what key pieces of information need to be pulled out so that you can understand it and get the most out of the reserve study that you're paying good money for. So kind of four main sections of most reserve studies. You'll have some summary pages, you'll have expenditures and funding plan tables, and then a narrative section, which is going to have a little bit more on the component specific details. Different providers have different formats for this, different levels of narrative sections. I've seen there's a lot of new reserve study providers out there that I haven't, that are fairly new in the last few years that are really skinnying down these narrative sections, which I think, obviously makes the study a little bit less expensive, a little more less time goes into it, but also missing some important stuff. So I want to share that with you and what to look for in your reserve study. So let's jump right into the executive summary. This is going to have some real basic information about the association, and people ask, well, what should we share? The executive summary is probably as much as most homeowners and even a lot of board members are going to read of the reserve study. But so we try to put as much good information in there as we can about the basics of the property, the timing of the inspection, the goal that we use. Did we use a cash flow method or a component method? Are we targeting a fully funded balance, a baseline funding, threshold funding? That is really important and it's critical to the outcome of the study. You will see some studies showing multiple different goals in that. And so if you're not sure, be sure to ask what goal, what funding goal is our study of these numbers meant to achieve? Because if they're trying to achieve a full funding, for example, the contributions, the required funding for the assessment levels is going to be much higher than if they're trying to identify baseline funding in most cases. So understanding the goal of the reserve study and the methodology used. Component method is still widely used in Florida. It is really only used in Florida, I will say. Most other states and other countries are looking at what we call the pooled method here. We call it the cash flow method also. It is kind of a holdover, I think, from the administrative code prior to 2002, which required communities in Florida to have separate reserves and maintain segregated reserve components. The new statute does address this as well. It kind of says the board can decide which accounting method to use, whether it's cash flow or component. Sources of cost, really important here. The costs are changing greatly in our industry, in the construction industry, labor, materials, tariffs, inflation. All of those things are really driving some volatility in those. So understanding the sources and the timing that was used for these your reserve study is important to look at. The starting point. So this is important. Every reserve fund has a physical analysis and a financial analysis. We want to list the starting point of the reserve fund there. And then priority projects and funding recommendations. And in this case, it's kind of the meat of the report. In this example, we're talking about some painting that was needed right away, sealant replacements and replacements of the roof that were needed, and those were kind of the priorities of this particular community. And then the recommended required funding amounts needed to fund the reserves are highlighted in there. And you know, a little graph, we include a little table and a little graph chart here to highlight the reserves. We'll be seeing this, the table is the reserve contributions and the balances for the next 30 years. The chart, though, we'll see this in a few slides in a little more detail, but the chart at a high level has reserve expenditures, the red bars, over the next 30 years. It's got green bars, so the inflows to the reserve fund, so outflows and inflows, and then the blue line is the reserve balance. So this is a pooled reserve or the cash flow reserve that we talked about, and in this case, it's a threshold funding model because it's going to come close to zero but not hit zero. It looks like the actual numbers are about 60,000 is the lowest point. So this community has a threshold of about $60,000 that the reserves never go below, even after big projects are happening. So that's kind of a graphical approach. So we get a lot of questions, you know, well, we have, you know, $500,000 in reserves. Is that, you know, is that good? It seems like a lot for a community of our size. As you can see from this example, it would depend where you're at on the life cycle of this plan. Having $500,000 in this year with 2022 would be pretty much right on track. If we had $5,000 or $500,000 in 2043, we're going to be quite a bit short of where we need to be to cover the big expenses that are coming up at that time. And if we had $500,000 in year 2028, we're going to have, in this particular example, you're going to have more than what is needed. So it's a timeline, and the cash flow is critical to outline in your reserve schedule, and in the executive summary it should highlight that as well. The next slide is kind of the meat of the reserve study, if you will. It's going to, and this is where what's going to drive those results. It's the expenditures table, and it's going to outline the components, the inventory of component, we call it. So, and this is probably the biggest pitfall that I still see associations make, is they don't get the right items on the list, but having the right components, their quantities, the quantities and useful lives. Quantities here being, you know, whether it's square feet, individual units, each square yards, linear feet of sealants, all of that is outlined in this expenditures table. The useful life and remaining useful life, two separate columns, and these are important disclosures in your budget. So you have a total useful life and then a remaining useful life. Both should be highlighted because one would be, you know, the life of a new project, and one would be the remaining life based not only on its age, but the condition, the use, the history of repairs, etc., of that component. In addition to the useful life, the cost information, we break it out into four columns, one being the unit cost, so per square foot. We have $35 per square foot of this composite balcony, meaning the per phase cost, meaning if we're going to break this into a phase project, what's the phase and the total cost. If you're doing the project all at once, those two will be the same. But the total cost sorry for the old example, but this is in 2019 dollars. And then the inflated costs. So when we do this over the next 30 years, what is that going to cost? And then, as you can see, the inflated cost is quite a bit higher than the total cost, even using a 2.5% inflation rate. It's almost more than double. And I think that's because this project actually occurs twice in this schedule. It occurs in the first part of the study, and then again at the last 30 years. So that's kind of gives you a relativity of what the scope of the expenditures are over the next 30 years, which is a typical cash flow life. And then the years in which those items can play, so are replaced or repaired. So that was a component, that was a pooled schedule. Like I said, also known as cash flow. And then this is a component schedule, which you'll see has much of the same information, the useful life. It could have the quantities as well, the unit cost, the cost of replacements. But instead of identifying a cash flow of when the items are going to need to be done, essentially kind of starting with this column, it says January 1st projected balance, we're doing a straight line depreciation of each item. So we're saying, how much do we have for that project? In this case, the balcony project, $69,000. We've got 20,000 on hand, meaning we've got another 49,000 as our what I'm calling the unfunded residual balance, the portion we don't have. And then we simply divide that number by the remaining years. So how many years do we have to catch up to that 48,000? We've got 4 years until the project's needed, meaning we set aside $12,000 for that component in the next budget year. And we do this for each item and add it up. This table kind of ties it back to your existing category. So you might have a couple different painting line items, a couple different roofing line items, but the total cost of replacement and then the contribution required for each item should be listed in your schedule. And in this one, I'll just point out, this is just an example, but you can see, and this is very common, they currently are unfunding a large number of items. Over $1 million of their, almost half of their reserve components were not part of this existing schedule, which is pretty common because the existing schedule is often not based on a professional reserve study. It might be based on developer estimates or what the board has encountered to date. But as a building starts to age, community starts to age, more and more items come up. So this is why, in many cases, communities in this situation are saying, well, maybe they're contributing already 140,000, so this wouldn't be too bad to continue to fund their current items, but to add all the items that they're not funding, because many of those items right now don't have any funds associated with them, it's a significant increase in their reserve. So a lot of the structural integrity reserve studies, for example, that we've done have had new items like concrete restoration and plumbing and electrical systems that never were part of their reserves before, are now having to catch up to those. And if they fund that as individual components, it's a very substantial increase. So many associations are looking to go back to that pooled funding plan versus the component funding plan. So this is just, the funding plan is your financial roadmap. It's going to offset your future capital expenses, that we just talked about. The funding plan allows us to put some interest earning in a pooled method. We're looking at many years. The component method is going to look at a snapshot for each individual year. It's going to just going to be generally today's dollars and depreciated for next budget year. The pooled method looks out over many years, and that's why we can kind of start to include inflation and interest into these types of funding plans. So here's a little bit of a zoomed in picture of this. The cash flow method is going to have your current starting balance, like we talked about. Hopefully, you've got some reserves set aside. It's going to have your required contributions to the reserves, required funding for the reserves, as well as interest earnings, and then the expenditures by year, which in a pooled method, we're totaling up all the expenses we see we need over the next 30 years. And we're saying each year, how much are those expenses? Think those red bars in that graph we saw earlier. And then, of course, the year-end balance, which then becomes the starting balance for the next year. So each year is kind of circular income outflows and ending balance. And we're always targeting to make sure that ending balance never drops below zero. And in a lot of cases, a critical year. So like I said, in this one, we've got a couple of critical years where they get down to 60-some thousand. Considering the size of the community, that was a healthy threshold for that. The statutes would allow us in Florida to take that all the way down to zero. I have many communities where the board say, look, we never want to drop below 100,000. We never want to drop below 200,000, depending on thinking about things like uninsured components, unanticipated expenses, perhaps even hurricane deductibles get thought about when they're thinking about that threshold. And so there's no one size really fits all for that, but it's an important discussion to have as a board with your reserve study providers. So, what are we targeting? Are we targeting, again, going back to that initial slide, are we targeting a threshold? Are we targeting zero? Are we targeting 100% of the balance, or 50% of the balance, or a fully funded balance, whatever it might be? So that we're seeing a lot of, so that's kind of, ours is kind of laid out, our reports for reserve advisor laid out in that horizontal. Other people do it in a horizontal way. Some do it in this vertical way. Same information here. You'll see this very often. This is kind of a standard software that a lot of companies are using that generate this table. Same kind of column, same kind of information here. The one column I'll point your attention to is the percent funded. In this particular example, the percent funded, varies between, I guess, 40 and 10% at the lowest percent funded. And again, this is pretty common because you're not spending all of the money in any one year. So to have 100% of the funds held in any one year, what we call the fully funded balance in any one year, is going to be a pretty high number. You can see the fully funded balance listed here for this community. It gets over $1 million in many of the years. But if you look at the expenses, I don't see a single expense here that's over $500,000. So to have that much money on hand at any one point is, in many cases, in my opinion, probably overfunding the reserves, which is why many associations look to the cash flow funding. The contributions you see, just like in the prior example, they are increasing by a little bit. In this case, they're increasing 3% per year, just to account for equity between current and future owners. And then you'll see this rating, and this is common in our industry. I don't put a whole lot of stock into it, but there's some data out there that says if your reserve fund is 70% funded, then you're in good position. If you're between 30 and let's see, I think it's 30 and or 35, I think is based on these numbers, 35 and 70%, you're in fair condition. Anything less than 35% is weak positioning. I don't think that tells the whole story. Like I said, I have many associations that will operate below 35% for many, many years without the need of a special assessment because of the expense profile and the fact that the expenses are spread out in a manner that doesn't require them to have that high percent funded there. So I don't really put a lot of stock into those. I think that, the statutes and most would say, as long as you've got your reserve above zero, you're going to be statutorily okay. And if you put an extra threshold in here, you can see their threshold is about 10% funded. The balance, never just ticks below $100,000 in this example. It is their critical year, but $100,000 threshold is probably healthy for this community and not something that I would say is a weak plan at all. But nonetheless, be on the lookout for those schedules. I wanted to share that with you. Back to our kind of graph, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time going through how these can be impacted. Inflation, interest, we've talked about, have huge impacts on these plans. Our goal is to develop stable yet adequate inflows, so stable, adequate funds for these reserves, so that while the expenses are going to vary from year to year, the people living in the community are paying a fairly stable amount. We don't have to jump up because we've got a big expense coming. We don't have big decreases and then bouncing back and forth. Just like any business, which, let's face it, your community association is a business, to be able to kind of have predictable required funding coming in is going to be healthy for your community and get everyone on the right page. Now, it might be higher than the community wants those levels to be at, but the responsibility of the board and managers is to be transparent about it, what it truly costs to live in the community association. So let's look at this plan again. You can see the green bars, the inflows are much higher on the right side. That just is because of inflation, and then they are on the left side. And then same with the red bars, they're also inflated. I try to and recommend that we're matching the rates of inflation on those. So if we're assuming a 3% inflation rate or a 4% inflation rate on the expenses, on the outflows, to also include a 3 or 4% just to match the number on the inflows. It's an assumption. It's wrong. Inevitably, we're going to be off on that estimate. And so, but whatever assumption you make, as long as you're making it on the inflow and the outflow sides, they tend to have a bit of a canceling effect there. So that's my recommendation. The statutes say that you can allow for some inflation, but I think you kind of run the risk of, if you include a 10% increase on your inflows and only a 3% increase on your outflows, you're really backloading the expenditure schedule. And I think the division of condominium specifically frowns upon that based on conversations I've had with them. But let's look at what can happen here. So as you see, we had this prior example, go back one slide, sorry. In this prior example, where right from the beginning, we're increasing about 3% per year. Well, what happens if we don't? And this example is we're doing no inflationary adjustments for the first 6 years. We're just leaving the contribution flat. I had a conversation this week with a board that said, gosh, we really don't want to have to go every year and increase the contributions increase people's dues. Like, why do we have to do that? Can't we just keep it the same for a few years and then increase it? And my response was, you can, but you're going to need to do a much larger increase that after those years. And I wouldn't advise it. A quick story: when I first moved into the condo where I'm on the board, they hadn't increased the fees in about 6 or 7 years. They were actually taking in less money than they were spending on their budget on the operating side, much less short a bit on the reserve side. And I knew that when I moved into the community, they were using component reserves. I knew we could switch to pooled and have some savings there. But we did have to implement about a $40 a month increase right away when the first budget that I was a part of as a board. And that was a very painful experience for the community. There's a lot of unrest and upset. Took a lot of communication, but thankfully, I'm still living there and still survived it. But it was uncomfortable. The next year, we raised it, I think, again about $5 a month, and we heard some grumblings. But after that, every year we've kind of increased it because costs increased, because we're keeping up with the market. There were a few years there where we had low inflation and kept it the same. But kind of the understanding that as costs go up in our world, the association assessments are also going to have to go up to keep up with this inflation. And I can tell you, some of the worst cases I've seen as a consultant are boards that did this and kept the fees same for many years and just fell behind. And as you can see, the reserve balance in this example, dropped significantly short, just because of not increasing for inflation for 6 years. After 6 years, this plan increases for inflation. But I just showed kind of the dramatic effect of that compounding inflation. Here's the same schedule. We're increasing the same amount in and inflating it for the same levels that we had, but we're starting a little bit lower. So we're starting in this case about 300,000, where we were at closer to, what was it? I think it was 600,000. Yeah, 600,000 earlier. So in order to make that up, maybe needed to put some additional higher expenses. So this isn't ideal, I don't think, but in this example, the initial critical year was requiring some higher funding for the first 6 years, again, because the starting balance was insufficient, and then a little bit of a drop. So those kind of initial contributions drop. And you could consider this additional contributions or just higher reserve assessments for the first 6-7 years, and then a drop down to a more sustainable level after that. So that's another kind of option. We can show this in this is kind of allowed, if you will, by the division. What we can't show is any deferral of that. So we couldn't just roll up these purple bars and say, okay, in 2027, we're going to have a big assessment to pay for that. That would not be adequate funding. So as long as, from day one, you're assessing a level that's adequate, can include some inflation, it may include a decrease, but can include a big increase out in the future, the funding plan is going to essentially comply with the division's requirements. Here's an example, just a much higher threshold that they have. They may be able to do some some flat contributions in that case to lower down the funding plan. But those are kind of funding examples that I wanted to show you just again in general from the reserves. And then the last part of the report that we're going to talk about is the narrative section. I mentioned different providers have different levels of detail in here, but we should have some good information about the specific quantities. History is so important. As boards change, that's going to be a constant in our industry. Boards are going to turn over, managers are going to turn over. The people that were there the last time that the building had a roof, or may not, may only be 1 or 2 people that live in that building now after that happened 15, 20 years ago. So history gets lost, history gets forgotten. But your reserve studies, if you have old reserve studies, should document history. So I encourage you, if you're not sure, we ask for this sometimes, let's go look at an old reserve study, see what the conditions were when that was done in 2019, and if there's some history that people knew at that time that we can record. It's not really recorded in any other association document. Of course, you've got your governing documents, but that doesn't tell you the last time the siding was painted or the stucco was repaired. And then the condition is so important, documenting the photographs. Not everyone in the community sees those conditions. We include in our report some schematics so you can understand the scope of work of when you go to do the roof replacement, what is all getting replaced. I mean, we have to keep in mind, we're all engineers that do these studies here at Reserve Advisors, but we recognize that not everyone has that background and not everyone is that, fully understanding the construction methods and materials that are used. So we try to put a little bit of information to bring up the knowledge base to a base level for boards. And then again, some good information about criticality, the cost of the timing of the expenses, the maintenance requirements are often included in here as well. So some valuable information beyond just the numbers in a lot of your reserve studies. We get questions about, should I send the reserve study to everyone? Well, the structural integrity reserve study now does have to be either sent to every member of the community or at least made available to them electronically or otherwise. So, or electronically available or sent to them. Other reserve studies, historically have not been, or if you're an HOA, you don't have to do a reserve study. First of all, you don't have to send it out to everyone. But at a minimum, if you're not non-serves as well, it is an association document. But at a minimum, what you do have to send folks is a reserve schedule with their budgets. So each year, a reserve schedule should be attached, usually on the second page of the budget or at the bottom of the budget. And whether you're pooled or a component, I want to remind everyone it's critically important to include these information, the items you're seeing on the slide here, in each reserve schedule that goes out with your budget. So the name of the reserve item, the useful life of each item, remaining useful life of each item, the replacement cost of each item. Again, whether you're pooled or a component, still have to list the items that are in that pool or that component, and then the starting balance of each item or group of items if it's pooled, and the contribution or funding requirement for each item or group of items if it's pooled. So those two, if you have individual items like we showed in that component schedule, you might have a funding requirement for each item versus a funding requirement for the overall pool. So this is critical with all condos, regardless of 3-story, whatever you are, have to put this in your budget. And then any homeowners associations that have what we would consider statutory reserves. The report current is also critically important. Ultimately, as board members, we all have this pressure to not increase our fees on our members, but I will tell you again, that is not your primary job. But being proactive with your reserve planning, taking care of projects before they become maintenance issues, deferred maintenance, addressing smaller items before they become bigger items, taking care of your components and taking care of the individual pieces of your structure will make the overall structure last longer. So avoiding surprises, having the money available for a board just makes sure that they have the items taken care of, which is going to minimize complaints from your owners and ultimately, reduce cost of ownership, but also maximize the value of the investment of everyone there. So if you're ever bored, take out a quick piece of paper or calculator and figure out, what is the value of all the homes in your community, and add them all together. How many units do you have? Multiply by the average value of the homes. That's the size of the business that you're actually running. And oftentimes it's millions, hundreds of millions, if not more, of value that's tied up in your communities. And so important to think about, a plan and keeping a current reserve study and looking at those different scenarios and communicating that to the membership. Ultimately, that's going to build trust in you as a board member or as a CAM, like that you're providing good information, relying on professional information and accurate information. So the structural integrity reserve studies, the statute requires that every 10 years in the state of Florida. But I could not fathom going into this 2026 budget season using a 2017 or a 2018 reserve analysis. Our industry recommends updates every 3 years. If you're not a 3 habitable story condo, or if you're a homeowner association, there's no requirement again in the statutes to do a reserve study, but a 3-year update cycle is kind of the industry standard. Could certainly go longer in some cases, depending on how accurate some of the assumptions were. Are we actually seeing 3% inflation, or did that jump again, or are we following the timeline for these repairs or replacements? Has the cost spiked because of some new tariff or something that's going to throw our plan off? Do we have a big project upcoming? All of those might make you want to update your study a little bit sooner. Not to mention storms. So many of our customers on the West Coast especially this year, are updating at a 1 or 2 year interval, because Helene and Milton, and even some are dealing with Ian stuff, still have changed the plan of what it was a year, just one short year ago or 2 years ago. So encourage you to update, keep your study current, and hopefully this material is going to help you utilize and implement your research study a little bit better way, and more valuable, get more value out of your reserve studies. I'm gonna I think I'm gonna end the slideshow, and then I will get in. I know there's a ton of questions. I'm sure there's a lot about the new law. So let me just stop sharing here.
And Matt,
And
while you're doing
Jeff,
that, fantastic job. Have a sip of water for a second. You are always wonderful. I'm just going to chime in real quick while you go over some of the Q&A here that you are more than welcome. Hang out for the Q&A. Matt's got some valuable information here, but the required part is over after you go into the chat, click the link, and fill out your evaluation. So go ahead and do that. After you fill out the evaluation, the screen after that will contain Matt's contact information as well as the link to download the slides as well as our future upcoming webinars. So I don't want to take away from your time, Matt, for you to get back to it. And folks, remember, whatever you hear today, whether it was during Matt's presentation or what you are about to hear, should never, ever, ever be considered as legal advice. If you have any questions, you're not sure about something that was said today, always, always, always contact your association counsel. Trying to skimp now will end up costing you more later. Remember that. Matt, back to you, sir.
Thank you, Jeff. I should have said that at the very beginning. I'm not an attorney, nor do I want to play one on TV or on a webinar. So, but so when it comes to these questions, I know we have a lot that deal with legal issues and implementation of the statute. So, just I think keep that in mind, and I'll try to answer it to the best of my ability, my experience, my discussions with lawmakers. I've worked closely with the division, and so I have some good experience in this area, but certainly I cannot defend you in a court of law if something goes wrong. So please consult with your attorneys on some of these very important issues here. Do we want to? How do you want to do the question? You want me just to run through them, Jeff, or any particular ones you think I need to start with?
Well, do you want to? Go ahead, Lisa. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying there's quite a few questions, and no doubt some of them are duplicates, but there are some really great questions in there. Jeff, do you want to navigate?
No, go for it. I'm here if you need me. Or do you want to Matt, do you want to steer clear of some of the 913 ones, or do you want to see?
No, let's try to get through them. I'll just start at the top.
Okay.
This one, Barbara asks, what do you think of the 913 change of 25,000 replacing the previous $10,000 minimum for reserves? I can answer this because it's just my opinion on this. I think $10,000 was the threshold. So what Barbara's referring to, for those who don't know, there's always a statute since 1984 that said there had to be roofing, painting, paving, and anything else over $10,000 had to be in your condominium reserve budget. But 1984, $10,000 is the equivalent of $25,000 in today's dollars. So I don't think it's necessarily an inappropriate change at all. I think there's smaller communities out there, including where I live, where a $24,000 expense is going to blow our whole budget for the year. So this is kind of the statutory minimum. And in a way, it's a maximum. But anyway, it's you can still budget for, if your community is smaller and you still want to budget for $10,000 items from reserves, you can. It's just that you don't have to. And so larger communities that have a $5 million annual budget might have no problem saying, okay, we're going to do anything less than 25,000 through operating expenses, and that works fine. So that's kind of what they were trying to cast the net about all these associations. We've got thousands, tens of thousands of associations throughout the state, and there's so many different sizes that you have to pick what's right for you, and they don't want to make it too restrictive for everyone. So
of course,
I don't think it's a bad change. It kind of modernizes it just brings that $10,000 to current dollars.
Let's go. I have one that was pre-submitted via email before we started. If an association is from Barry, if an association waived the funding of their 2025 pooled SERS reserves, must they fund these waived reserves in 2026 in order to align their reserves with the latest SERS, which was prepared in 2024, in order to comply with 913? So it's another 913. 913 is a popular topic.
And this issue probably pre-existed 913. I've gotten this question a number of times, and I'll give you my interpretation of it again. It's not,
Oh, okay.
you should ask your legal counsel specifically, but the statute says, and even after 913 says the reserve funding amounts in your budget must reflect the findings of the most recent structural integrity reserve study. And so when I look at that, I say, okay, well, if the most recent reserve study said we had to fund $100,000 in 2026, it doesn't necessarily matter what happened in my mind before that, or if the expenses change. Look, the expenses are going to change. The contributions before that may have changed. I think as long as the community is going into their properly prepared reserve study and pulling out the amount, and they're saying the funding is matching based on what the funding is from the most recent structural integrity reserve study, I don't think they're going to run into issues, except the issue they're going to run into is that they're going to fall short on funds. But that can happen anyway. I mean, if your structural integrity reserve study says your roof's going to cost 1.1 million and it ends up costing 1.3 million, you are likely going to fall short on funds. But so it's not a silver bullet that means we'll never have to assess or will never be a shortfall again. It's just getting the funding tracking, and they've allowed some waivers, they've allowed some pauses. Now, especially with 913, you can pause the reserve funding, to take care of milestone work. But in that section, they actually said then you have to do an updated study, and that would be my advice to those that are in this situation as well. Is let's look at an updated study, because just like we looked at in some of those cash flow plans, not increasing or not building on one year can have a ripple effect in the following years. And so best practice would be to update your study, and then you'll say, okay, well, now we're starting at a little bit less money than we thought we were going to start, but we often can amortize that out over many more years, and so it's a minimal impact. I don't think anywhere that it says you have to go back and fund those items that you waived specifically before, but your council may feel differently.
Okay. Corinne has a question. It's a cooperative question. Do you want to go into that territory?
Sure.
Does the board of directors of a co-op, because she put in parentheses 719, choose the reserve method, or do you need the vote of the members? Do you happen to know that, or is that more of an attorney?
So in practice, it's been the board can choose which method to use in their budget, but you cannot take any funds that were set aside for another purpose and use them to like go into the pool, for example, without the prior vote of the owners there. And that was actually put into 913 now as well. So it's effective. The board can make the decision on what accounting method to use. Right. But be careful about spending. If you're historically, well, most communities historically have those restricted components listed, don't spend that money on anything else, or don't move it into a pooled reserve without prior approval of the owners.
And folks, there are a lot of questions here with over 300 of you in attendance. If we don't get to your question, it's not because it's a crappy question. It's because we have a lot of questions to get to. We'll do the best we can with the time we have left. Back to you, Matt. Do you have one in mind?
Let's see. I'm just kind of going from the top first out, I guess. Kathy asks, our board ordered a SIRS which stated that our roof would need a resurface in 2028 and a replacement in 2038. Our board just special assessed $120K to replace the roof this month. Why did the SIRS study not prevail? And will we need to do a new SIRS study to account for the board's actions for replacing the roof more than 10 years sooner than required? I think it almost kind of ties into Barry's question earlier. There are just because it's stated in a SIRS, and I we spend a lot of time as engineers digging into what we think and making estimates that we think are going to be correct. Yeah. Inherently, we are incorrect in every study that we do. I hate to say that, but every study we do has some error or something that comes up. I don't know the specific circumstances there, Kathy, but the board can still make that decision and say, hey, look, it's in the best interest not to do the coating. There's maybe insurance at play, I'm guessing, or something else that's there. And so the board had to make that decision. The fact is now they won't have to do that full replacement in 2038, I think it was. So that's going to recast it. So yes, update your schedule and recast the funding needs based on that change. And whether that's a change that was brought on by the board or a change that's brought on by the environment, regulations, insurance, previous boards, all those things they're inherently going to happen. And we just have to revisit the numbers and look forward. And that's actually one of the benefits of having a good reserve plan in an Excel sheet. You can say, okay, what if we do this? What if we do that? The board can make informed decisions there, and encourage you all to stay involved with those decisions. And if you're concerned that your board's not making the right decisions, go to the meetings, get involved, get on the committee, and help out.
Matt, you're a walking, talking encyclopedia. We have a question here. You touched upon a little bit earlier about inflation, tariffs, all these different things that can come up. Are there any guidelines or anything else people need to know about inflation factors? Are there any guidelines including inflation factors into the 30-year projections?
Yeah, just the statutes just say that they may include inflation. So I think it's a good idea. We look back at construction inflation, which is very different than cost of living. So construction inflation does tend to outpace, especially here in Florida, tends to outpace cost of living increases. So we look back, I think we have some pretty good data over the last 30 years or so. And we're using right now an average of the last 30 years in the mid to high threes as far as an inflation percentage. So that would be my advice, but certainly there's no mandates there of, you could, and I tell, I get, some of the board members are, used to work for the Treasury and they can estimate what exactly they think it's going to be. I'm happy to learn from them, and we can include other rates in their studies, whatever may make important. I think you just have to be reasonable with it, and going too far high or too low will require you to update more frequently.
Okay. I'm guessing this question/comment stems from something you mentioned during the presentation from Joseph. If you reach the final year of an asset and you do not have to replace the item, shouldn't that help to lower the amount of reserves needed in the following year?
It might, yeah, it certainly could. You would have to do a new reserve schedule that would reflect a newer remaining useful life. Your balance would be higher than you projected. That item probably now has a remaining useful life instead of, whatever it would say, it's a 10-year item. Instead of now 10 years because it was just replaced, it might only have a remaining useful life of 1 year. So it doesn't go away, but certainly that can impact it. Just as similarly though, we find just like one item might not need to be replaced, another item needs to move forward on the schedule, and there's a lot of moving parts there. So that certainly can impact it.
Okay. Let's see what else. I'm trying to get to some different people because we have a few folks that submitted several questions, and I want to try to spread the wealth here. How do you estimate, Barbara, the cost to have a reserve study done? Do you have any guide? I guess that goes along with vetting companies such as yourself. Like what are some of the questions you should ask? How do you vet companies like yourself? What are the questions boards or managers should be asking you?
Sure. Well, and all companies will make it very easy to get a proposal for a reserve study. It's really based on the time and size of the community and the time that their team would spend compiling it. Good questions to ask there, of course, are the qualifications of the people doing the study. Do they have that reserve designation, reserve specialist designation, or the professional reserve analyst designation, and/or are they a professional engineer or an architect? Those are kind of those basic qualifications that are required, especially for a structural integrity reserve study, but I think they make good qualifications for all reserve studies. I think one of the most important things to look at a sample report, look at references, and then look at what's going to happen after the study's completed, because I think that, again, that's kind of the point of this course, is that there's so many variables. Being able to use the study is the most important piece, and sometimes you could save a few dollars on the front end, but if you can't use it or can't get support, can't understand it after the fact, that money was wasted.
Okay. Here's a scenario type of question. So Joseph asking, in other words, if my association has been contributing $20,000 per year towards the replacement of the roofs, for example, and we reach the full replacement in year 20, if we don't have to replace the roofs in year 21, therefore we do not contribute an additional 20 grand. Is that correct? And will this lower the amount of reserves needed for the year 2021 for year 2021?
Yeah. So
sorry, tongue twister.
Yeah, right. So I think what he's saying is let's say we've got let's say it's $400,000 roof, and they've set aside $20,000 per year, and they've got $400,000 in year 21, but the roof doesn't need to be replaced.
Let's go with that.
Yeah. Then yes, if the roof is going to still cost $400,000, and that's a really important question. Is it still going to be next year? Is that roof still going to be $400,000, or is that roof going to be $420,000 next year? Which means we got to come up with that other $20,000. then if it's still going to cost $400,000, you've already got all that money in the bank. You're doing a component analysis. Then yeah, I wouldn't put any more money into that roofing account at that point.
Okay. Another hypothetical from Philip, and we'll do this one plus one more because we're 2 minutes before the top of the hour. A reserve study was done in 2023 before major construction defect work, such as replacement of roof, paint, gutters, etc. When should a new study be done with that in that scenario?
I would say now. I mean, assuming the work is at least identified and bid, I don't even think the work has to be completely done to do that reserve study and reforecast all those estimated useful lives and projection. It's a budget, so even sometimes if the project isn't wrapped up, but what you're going to spend, it's going to be done before the end of this year, I'd say go ahead and get an update so that you can budget in 2026 an appropriate amount based on all that work.
Okay. Can I throw you a slow 70-mile-an-hour Pedro Martinez curveball question here?
Please do. Please do.
Well, it's another 913 question. So I know it's coming up so much in this thread here. So we can't, So now with 913, can we put off fully funding until 2027 if we did our SIRS in 2024 and waived it in 2025?
So can we put off fully funding until 2027? There are two provisions that as I'm reading 913, that might allow that. One being if you determine if you can come up with an alternative funding source, be it in the statute specifically less special assessments, loans, or lines of credit. And that has to be approved by the membership and also readily available or immediately available for the use of the board. So I'm interpreting that as like the bank has to have the loan approved in order for you to use that money, or the line of credit approved in order for you to waive funding for that amount. The other provision that they added in 913 is the pause of reserve funds to address necessary repairs that are required by a milestone inspection. So if you're doing repairs because of a milestone inspection, then yes, I think you can pause the reserve funds, again, with the approval of a majority of the voting interest to do so, so that everyone's kind of understanding that's what's happening. We're focusing right now on these immediate, and that was the intent of the lawmakers, to focus right now on the immediate structural issues that are identified in the milestone, and then start saving for those items that have some more remaining useful life after a couple of years. This is 2 consecutive budget years. Reserve funding can be paused. And they even put in the statute, though, after that, you need an updated SIRS because you're going to have a different schedule than the one you did in 2023, I think it was.
2023, yeah. Yeah, sorry, I took away the Q&A because I know we got to get out here.
That's great. No, I appreciate all the questions. And like I said, I'm going to be doing another webinar the 9th, another one on the 10th. We're going to get into this. I know CAI and ACE, you guys are going to be doing a bunch of other information. Right. So great questions. Keep them coming. We'll do our best to get as much information out to you as we can in this format. And
Matt, I'll get you the Q&A report, the attendance report, the whole 9 yards.
Sure.
And before we head out, I'm going to remain on, everybody, by the way, but before Lisa and Matt head out, I just want to give you the opportunity for some parting words. Now, even though, Matt, your information will be on the slides that everybody will be getting, as well as on the evaluation submission confirmation screen, what is the best way you prefer folks to contact you? And we'll leave it at that.
I love talking to people on the phone, so I'll give you my direct phone number is 813-536-7201. That's direct to my office, so feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. That's easy to remember, Matt, M-A-T-T, @reserveadvisors.com.
Fantastic. You are always wonderful. Your smile is infectious. I love working with you. Thanks for doing this today. We appreciate you. We can't wait to do it again, Matt. You are wonderful.
Well, thank you. Thank you both. It's always fun to do this. I love this stuff, and I hope you can see my passion for it. And thank you all again, CAM's board members, for all the hard work that you do to make our communities well run and harmonious out there. Good job.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you did a great job, Matt. Thanks again for always stepping up and sharing your knowledge and expertise with us in the community. Also, I encourage everybody to connect with Matt on LinkedIn. You can find his whole speaking schedule there. You'll be able to see and register for other events that he's speaking at and for. So connect with him on LinkedIn as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both. I know you have things to get to.
Thank you, Matt.
I'm going to hang out. Matt, take care. Lisa, always great to see you as well. Both of you keep smiling. It helps me. And I'll see you again soon. Folks,
Take
A
care, folks.
wonderful 4th, everyone. Enjoy
wonderful. Happy and
enjoy the long
safe.
weekend. Yes, happy and safe.